I think we are live, so we can start. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Raah to Thriving Sahyadri through climate justice. This is the second edition of our webinar series, specially curated in celebration of World Environment Day. I am Sunidhi Hegde. I work as a research and policy associate at Raah Foundation, and I'm excited to moderate today's webinar. Let me take this opportunity to briefly introduce my organization. Raah Foundation is a grassroots NGO committed to ensuring water security, climate resilience, and sustainable livelihoods. Our interventions span watershed development, regenerative agriculture, and rewilding in the northern western parts of the Sahyadris in Maharashtra. Our research and policy wing, Raah Foundation's Center for Policy Research and Action, was launched very recently to amplify field learnings into policy and advocacy spaces. We aim to build an evidence based, justice oriented discourse through climate governance, especially in contexts that are often left at the margins of both ecological and economic planning. When we speak of climate justice, we are not just adding a moral lens to climate action, we are fundamentally questioning who bears the burden, who makes the decision, and whose knowledge counts. At Raah Foundation, working in the northern western Ghats, we have seen how the same climate stressors like erratic rainfall, drying aquifers, degraded forests play out very differently depending on a community's access to land, water, voice, and finance. And too often, the very communities who are closest to the land, Adivasis, women forest users, traditional water stewards, are treated as passive beneficiaries and not as designers of solutions. This is where climate justice comes into play, not as an abstract idea, but as a practical framework to guide all of our efforts in this domain. It asks us to shift power to recognize historical and structural inequities and to build systems that are accountable, inclusive, and rooted in ecological wisdom. Today's conversation brings together three distinct but deeply interconnected perspectives: law, participatory governance, and gender transformative finance. I take this opportunity to welcome our panelists for this evening, Mr. Vidya Kumar. Please spotlight him, Vika. Mr. Vidya Kumar is a senior Indian Forest Service officer with over 34 years of experience. His leadership roles of being PCCF and Chief Wildlife Warden of Punjab have spanned climate change, forests, water governance, and ecotourism. He has collaborated with global organizations like the World Bank and WWF India and brings deep expertise in institutional development and climate adaptation planning. We welcome you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us today. Another of our panelists this evening is Dr. KJ Joy from SOPPECOM. Dr. Joy is a celebrated water rights activist and policy researcher with over 3 decades of work in participatory water governance. As a founding member of SOPPECOM, he has shaped frameworks that center equity and sustainability. His research and advocacy have been pivotal in water-stressed regions like Maharashtra and the Western Ghats. Welcome, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. Lastly, but definitely not the least, we have Dr. Seema Bhatia Panthaki. Dr. Seema leads the gender platform at AVPN, focusing on channeling capital towards gender equitable development. With over 20 years of experience spanning philanthropy, developmental finance, and systems change, she has worked with the Ford and Aga Khan Foundation. Dr. Panthaki's work ensures that gender injustice is integral to climate action. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am, and a very warm welcome to all of you today. To begin our conversation, I'd like to pose a broad question to all three of you. Each of you approaches climate justice from different but deeply interconnected vantage points, be it Mr. Vidya Kumar's law and ecology perspective, be it Dr. Joy's participatory governance, and be it Dr. Panthaki's gender transformative finance. In one sentence, how would you define what climate justice means in your current work? We'll start with Mr. Kumar, followed by Mr. Joy, Dr. Joy, and Dr. Seema. I believe there is a disturbance on Mr. Kumar's end. Dr. Joy, maybe start with you.
Um, yeah, thanks, Suniti. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, just small correction is that I'm not doctor. I mean, I wanted to correct it when your email came. So this is called me Joy. I never got to do a PhD, though it was in my agenda, but in terms of my grassroots work and activism and things, probably I didn't get into that. So and even if I had a doctorate, I would have preferred you to call me just simple Joy. Okay, and thanks a lot to you and Raah Foundation for giving me this opportunity to be part of this very interesting panel discussion and also sharing the space with eminent people like Vidya Kumar and Seema. So I hope this leads to a synergetic conversation than a polarized one. Very often in panel discussions we have things like very polarized and type of thing. But I think whatever I read about both of you, both of the panelists, I'm sure there'll be sort of synergies in the conversation. Now, if you ask me to say it in one sentence, for me, of my work or the type of collectives that I'm part of, or even my own organization called Society for Promoting Participate Ecosystem Management, or the work I did as a political activist many years back, with which I'm still connected, I would say that in terms of climate justice, my focus of work or my emphasis has been articulating and grounding alternatives to the present development forms of different types. So how do you involve people, toiling people, either they're farmers or fishers or forest dependent communities, we call the primary producers, or nature dependent communities, to assert their rights, and while asserting the rights, how do you also involve them in articulating a different perspective to what you call development and things, so that their lives and livelihoods are taken care of. So this is primarily has been my focus of work. SOPPECOM does it in the water sector in many ways. We do articulate alternatives to large projects. In fact, we did a pioneering work in coming out with an alternative to the whole controversial Sardar Sarovar project when the conflict was on its height. And in South Maharashtra, we work with a social movement where they're also fighting against dams and other type of things. How do you do participatory knowledge production, what you call co-production of knowledge, data collection? And on the basis of that, how do we articulate a alternative to what the government's design, and the social movement mobilizes the toiling people to demand for the implementation of this. So on one hand, the destructive projects need to be opposed. And I think since Sahyadris and the Western Ghats is the focus of our discussion, there are a whole lot of projects are coming up. Whether it is the Barsu petrochemical complex, which is coming up, there are people resisting it. There is a new set of projects are coming up right from Maharashtra to Karnataka, what you call the pump storage hydropower projects in a big manner. And all big players are being there, whether it's Adani to everybody is doing this. Or there's a new imagination in Maharashtra itself called the new Mahabaleshwar, which is a highly infrastructure projects in the day. So there are so the first set is that how do you support movements which are resisting such destructive projects which have a exacerbating impact on the climate and the people's lives and things. And at the same time, how to involve people what they want. What is the type of alternative they want to have and things. So this is what I would say my focus of work has been in the what you call the type of work I do, and primarily in the water sector. I think I would stop there in case there's a follow-up question I can answer. Yeah.
I do have follow-up questions, but I think
Yeah.
we'll proceed with Mr. Kumar. He's back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. So after serving 34 years in government, now I am, you can say, advising eco-restoration in both Aravalli Hills and Western Ghat. And in my individual capacity, I am working on the fighting the plastic pollution in the tiger reserves. So that is my individual initiative, you can say. So in these two broad area, uh, I see climate justice as a framework where there is a fairness and equity. And through our baseline survey, institutional gap analysis, so all those tools, we come to a, you can say, prescription where the marginalized communities are given priority. They come to the center stage, that is one. Second is the amplify their voices if it is not heard properly. And third, I ensure that the equitable distributions are designed in the project itself. And lastly, it is the participative approach of the marginalized community, but it should be informed decision making. It should not be thrust by somebody else, either by the government or by CSO. It should be their own decision making, that is the informed decision making. So broadly, I see this framework under which all eco-restoration or plastic pollution should be designed and implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Seema, can we have you?
Yes, thank you, Sunidhi. Thank you, Joyji and Vidyaji. It's so great to meet you and listen to what the work that you're doing. So at AVPN, we move, capital towards impact. That's the basis of what we do. So in a sense, we do work on on the intersection of climate and gender, but we are sort of 3 steps removed from where you are. So it's really great to hear from the very kind of grassroots kind of work that you're doing that is so important, and also informing the sorts of financing requirements that there are, right, towards movements, towards justice, towards equity. So if you ask me about how we define climate justice in the means, or in the context of our current work, for AVPN, this climate justice comprises of 2 core components. One is our role as an ecosystem builder to shed light on the data, the evidence, the narratives, and the voices from Asia on the unequal impacts, responsibilities, and costs of climate change, particularly on women and girls and vulnerable communities in the region. And secondly is to mobilize intellectual, human, and financial resources from our network members with a gender lens to address these gaps pretty systematically. AVPN as an organization works across the continuum of capital. So this means that we work with philanthropic funders, but also non-philanthropic funders, including impact investors, sustainable finance providers, and others to move capital. And our goal is to use, to put together the data, to bring together best practice and solutions to move capital at the intersection of gender and climate. So let me stop there.
How fascinating. I think
Suniti, can I just add a sentence to what I said? In fact, one of the things which I said was that when you talk about alternatives, the last 10 years, some of us have been part of a very interesting initiative called Vikalpa Sangam, Alternative Confluences, which actually brings together grassroots activists, civil society organizers, and policy to some extent to look at critically what could be the different alternatives in different sectors or different parts of our lives and things. So this has been a very enriching journey for me in the last 10 years to interact, because otherwise, very often people who work on water generally doesn't talk to people who work on energy or people who work on, let's say, health and other. We all know that's all interconnected. So this is a very interesting, vibrant platform which brings together and gives me a much larger what you call a space to interact, critically examine, and also we have been trying to develop an alternative framework, what this alternatives means and things. So there's a website, and I would invite all of you to maybe check it out. There are very interesting positive stories when the world where we live, there's all very, the type of things which will come in the newspapers are very distressing often. So probably this gives you a hope. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Mr. Joy. I think one of the main reasons why we started engaging with subject matter experts such as you was in this realization that we're all working in silos, and that is not the way to go about solving these complex phenomena that are happening around us, especially when it comes to climate change. And I think interdisciplinarity is one of the major ways to really work in collaboration. And thank you so much for bringing that up. I mean, you couldn't have put it in a better way um, as to why the Raah to Thriving Sahyadris was founded upon. Let's move on to the questions that I have been pondering upon. One of my first questions to Mr. Vidya Kumar is, so you have worked extensively at the intersection of biodiversity, forest governance, and local rights. How can we center ecosystem-based adaptation in climate policy without instrumentalizing communities as mere implementers?
Yeah, that is a very good question, because first we have to understand what is NBA. So NBA based nature-based adaptation is one of the approach to climate change adaptation. There are other approaches also, but this is the main approach that we promote. It incorporates both conservation of the ecosystem, its restoration, and sustainable management into our adaptation strategy, so that we can enhance the resilience. That is the main approach. So in nutshell, the NBA is basically a ecosystem centric. It is a community driven. It is sustainable and cost effective, and it enhances the co-benefits. So these two elements, when it is a community driven and there is an element of co-benefit sharing, so there comes the role of the community being the center stage. They are not only the implementer, they are the partner. And that partnership is emanating from the co-creator of this design based on the baseline survey, because baseline survey is the most, you can say, essential activity that is missing in all our project formulation. Just we assume something and just then we design it. So baseline survey, that gives the evidence-based approach. Then we will design that what is the gap, what is the institutional and perception gap in the community, so that we can design those things in the project itself. So their role comes as a co-creator, as an implementer, and as a monitoring mechanism also. When we design that, I promote that thing that is called ecosystem health card for any ecosystem project. So there also the role of the community in monitoring the benefit, whether it is short term or long term or medium term. So their role is also envisaged in the project design itself. So basically in community approach, we bank on some principles. So first principle is the integrate indigenous and local knowledge. That is the first thing. Where their traditional knowledge, their cultural practices are taken into account in the project design itself. Second principle is empower community leadership. That is important, because by not empowering them, they can't be a co-creator or monitor or a better implementer. So for them, there is a need for the empowering. Third is the most important is we have to secure land and resource rights. So that is done through FRA in most of the cases, because FRA, if you see that land is also potentially around 34 million hectares, which is around 47% of the total forest area. So if we can approach those area of CFR, common forest resource, under the FRA, so if we can enrich or restore or manage on a sustainable basis, that will be great service to the nation also. Fourth principle is we have to provide a flexible financing to this community. Only then they can be a good implementer or because that gives an incentive for participation. Otherwise, conservation without benefit is no meaning. Fifth, I will say that we have to embed the equity in policy design itself, so that if there is an imbalance in that functioning, that should be corrected at that stage. And lastly, we have to design a comprehensive monitoring and evaluation mechanism that gives rise to their involvement from the starting to the finish itself. So that can be done through ecosystem health card. So these are some principles I will suggest for the community to be not only implementer, but to be in a better position as a co-creator and monitor also. Thank you.
Wonderful. How wonderful, Mr. Kumar. I think something that really resonated with me was how you assigned certain roles to communities of being co-creators, implementers, and monitors. I think something about that is so empowering. Thank you so much for that. We move on to the next question for Mr. John. Sir, you have written extensively about the interlinkages between water justice, environmental sustainability, and community-led planning. In the face of intensifying climate impacts, how can water justice be a foundational pillar of climate justice, especially in vulnerable geographies like the Sahyadris?
Before I get into that, I would like to say that I echo most of what Vidya Kumar said. I could not believe that he was a forester earlier. I thought he is an activist talking in the platform. So I thanks for raising some of the very important points. So I may not repeat that. I completely agree with most of what you said in terms of what you call privileging equity as an important concern. Not in terms of projects we design, even in the policy making processes and things. I mean, that's something which struck me also. So in terms of getting back to the question, Sunidhi, you asked, one is that when I say participatory governance, because the word participation can mean anything to everybody. I mean, from 1990 onwards, you have been using this word. Even if people economically contribute, that is participation. Some forms of voluntary labor is participation. But I think what Vidya Kumar earlier said in the first this one, in terms of how do communities, and communities here, I mean a very disaggregated manner. Now, I don't believe that rural community is one. It is divided on class, caste, patriarchy, ethnicity, on those lines. And we need to engage with these fault lines. Otherwise, romanticizing community doesn't mean, and then that will beg a question, whose voice are we representing in this? So I think that's an important issue. And so the point which he mentioned also, that how do we empower communities to make informed choices of different options, and do they get space to do it? So for me, participation means that, and also democratization. For me, participation doesn't mean that whether you participate in a little way or something. How do you democratize things? Which means debureaucratization to a great extent, and also empowering communities to take things of their own. And here we also need to talk about democratization of the communities themselves. And I think these are all different layers of which means, and also how rules and norms of behavior which constraints or this in a way, and the organizations. So I take the, when you talk about institutions in a broader sense of what Elinor Ostrom talked about, both in terms of rules and norms of behavior or access to resources and things, or its governance, and the institutions you craft for this. And there, I think representation becomes a very critical issue. Nowadays, we hear the word that nothing about us without us. So I think this is a very important slogan for me to this. The second part of what my response will be that when you look at environmental justice as a global movement, it started in, for example, the Black communities in the US, where they found that the entire nuclear waste has been dumped on their backyards. So the whole understanding which came out was that there are certain social sections which bear the burdens of development, or burdens of all that, and there are certain social sections which benefit out of it. And these two social sections don't match. And dam building in India country is a classical example. We know that, where the Adivasis or the ethnic population bear most of the costs, and the benefits goes to different communities. And also I would bring in that climate change is another area where the people who actually suffer or bear the burden are not the ones who contribute. much to the community, whether it is the national or the global level in terms of between nations or within a country, and you look at. So we need to have that this. So when I say connect, so in fact, water justice movement also came as part of the larger umbrella of environmental justice movement. If you look, trace the whole movement of water justice globally, the first instance of water justice was in terms of resisting the whole question of privatization of water, which has been taking place, or commodification of water. Now it also means that how do you ensure a social minimum to everybody in terms of access to water? So we talk about equitable water distribution. So SOPPECOM talks about that. We try to help social movements to ground this on the ground and things. Or I've been part of the national committee which was set up in 2019-20 to draft a new national water policy, where we brought in equity as a major principle of entire thing. Because in any degraded system, whether it is Sahyadris or drop-down regions of Maharashtra and thing, water is one of the things which makes a clear difference in terms of how do you regenerate your ecosystems and things. And so if you can ensure enough water to meet your livelihood needs and have a production system around that, which also reduces the overall water footprint. We are not talking about the highly irrigated sugarcane-based type of economies and things. But you can also create a much larger ecosystem productivity if you can spread the water across the ecosystems and things. So we have an approach called biomass-based sustainable prosperity for all. In fact, there's a book, Banking on Biomass, which is available, which talks about the whole strategy and things. So I think in terms of environmental justice, or when you talk about climate adaptation, as well as even mitigation, I think water does play a crucial role in this. Now, how do you make this water available is an issue in the climate change discourse. For example, there are people who are saying that water storage behind large dams is an indicator of how well you can manage your climate. So those schools, even World Bank and other type of people, there are people who are saying that. No, they say that in the US, for example, per person or per capita, 5,000 cubic meter storage is there. Or middle income countries, there are 3,000 or 2,500. India is much low. So the whole priority is to build large dams and storages and things. But I think counter to that, people like us have been working that soil is our biggest water storage. Now, how do you work with soils then? How do you take up soil amelioration programs instead of going for large storages, which is destructive, and certain communities do get impacted and things? So I think we need to relook at our own priorities in terms of where do you make interventions and things. So for me, then water becomes an important input or entry point into ecosystem regeneration and things. Of course, the issue of land rights and land issues also connected with that. Earlier days of the progressive movement, we all talk about land redistribution. Nowadays, we don't talk about it. So we feel that land and water are two distinct resources. The fact that I don't have land doesn't mean that I need to be excluded from water rights or water. If I get my water rights, then I can negotiate at the village scale. And there are examples of doing that. We ourselves have been doing it in one project where the women asserted their rights to water in one of the villages in Marathwada, where they got water rights, and they negotiated with the landowners and the common lands how they can use this water and things. So it opens up a different pathway and things to even demanding land rights, saying that, okay, we have water rights. Where is our land? So I think these questions can be creatively encased. So for me, then water becomes an entry point into the whole question of climate adaptation, mitigation, justice point of view. So how do you ensure that? And we have done water balance studies in the state of Maharashtra, and we feel that without going for any new dams, any new storages, there is enough water we have stored which can be equitably distributed to every people, including the landless. So this is a perspective we need to take it both in practice. And interestingly, there's a project which SOPPECOM is part of in South Maharashtra in a district called Sangli, where we are working in a taluka called Atpadi, where we are helping the social movement, the Pani Sangharsh Chalwal, to ground this. They fought against the government of Maharashtra for 15 years, saying that a huge irrigation project need to be restructured on equitable, integrated manner. And finally, in 2016, they succeeded. saying that they will at least partly restructure this project, a government public irrigation system on equitable lines. And SOPPECOM was working with the movement and the irrigation department there to put this whole idea into actual practice. There are problems. I'm not saying that there are no problems. There are a whole lot of problems to work through, communities and other type of things. But this gives you an interesting pathway to restructure, water sector in more equitable, sustainable, regenerative manner. And I would say that it's not only because I work on water issues, because water, especially in drought-prone regions, water becomes a very critical resource in terms of, when you talk about climate or environmental justice. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those insights, Mr. Joy. I think it's very intriguing to look at climate justice from an entry point of water. I think that was so intriguing. Thank you so much. We move forward with a question to Dr. Seema Bhatia Panthaki. Dr. Seema, you often speak about the need to address structural gender inequities in climate action. In your experience, what are the most persistent blind spots in current climate financing when it comes to gender justice? I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I think some of this has already been highlighted, right, by Mr. Vidya Kumar and Mr. Joy about the issues. So one is to recognize that we need to think more intersectionally. So it's not just, it depends on who you are, but then there are so many other social, economic, political factors that impact on the outcomes that you would face as an individual, as a community. So I think that's quite important. I think also the point around the need for land rights, etc., is such an important discussion to be had, because when you want to shift power, ownership of assets is key. But given the question that you've posed to me around the persistent blind spots in current climate financing when it comes to gender justice, so I mean, the first thing to say is, again, I'm taking an Asia-centric view because we work across Asia, and I can bring in a few points from India. But Asia has a dual challenge of both high climate vulnerability and persistent gender inequality, right? So we know that no single country in the world has achieved gender equality. And then there are many layers of this. This differs from country to country. In India, we face a huge amount of burden, both because we have both high climate vulnerability and persistent gender inequality. So then what we need to think about is integrated solutions that address both of these simultaneously. Now, we know from the data that's available that investing with a gender lens fuels long-term climate resilience, right? But just a staggering statistic that we come across, and again, this is a cause, this is a symptom of the issues that we face, is based on data available from 2021, globally, less than 2% of climate investments were gender tagged, which means that a very small proportion of the climate finance specifically addresses gender equality or inequality issues. This means that a very small amount of climate finance is addressing unique needs and vulnerabilities of women and girls in the context of climate change. We know from everything we see around us and read around us that actually women and girls are facing the brunt of climate impacts. They're at the forefront every time there's a climate disaster. There are structural inequities in our societies, normative issues that are affecting them. So this is sort of a key concern for us. Worse still, we are relegated to thinking about gender and climate justice in the context of projects and initiatives and not systems. So, from what Mr. Joy and Mr. Vidya Kumar were saying, we need to think more systematically, right? It's not just about solving an issue with particular climate finance project in one particular area, one particular context, or one particular community. We really need to think about how the climate finance system itself is moving to think about how we include gender equality and justice within this. So given this context, I think there are actually a number of blind spots that we can note in the context of current climate financing. But let me just highlight three key ones, right? Firstly is to do with how climate finance and development financing is often perceived at odds with each other. So you will often go into rooms and big negotiations where climate finance conversations are happening without actually acknowledging the impacts it's having on the lives of people in terms of all the other SDGs that are out there, right? So it's just the climate SDGs that you're thinking about. So I think that's sort of the first sort of blind spot there is that we need to, we need to overcome, because climate justice and development justice and therefore gender justice are inextricably linked. And we need to be able to recognize that we need to bring a gender lens, I mean, literally to anything that we do, but particularly bring a gender lens to climate finance as much as we need to bring a climate lens to gender finance. That is, investing in projects without a view to building climate resilience is just as ineffective as building gender projects without considering gendered impacts on climate projects, right? So we need to bring this narrative around development, justice and climate justice together. So that's the first blind spot we need to overcome. I think a second blind spot is the structure of climate finance itself and the way it's currently moving. And this requires deeper investigation as to why more climate finance isn't moving with a gender lens. So for instance, data available from the Climate Policy Initiative suggests that mitigation finance, which is where most of the money goes, or at least is being tracked, grew between 2018 and 22, grew at a compound annual growth rate of 20% to reach about 1.3 trillion USD, right? Now, again, this is way lower than what we need. But that, the fact is that the investments were made mostly in advanced economies, in China, they drove this increase, and they were primarily in sectors such as buildings and infrastructure, energy efficiency, battery electric vehicles, renewable energy. Now, these are not traditionally seen as sectors where gender equality conversations lend themselves, right? They're seen as something big, infrastructure pieces that happen at a policy level, at international levels. So this is not where gender equality is often even considered, let alone be the center of conversation in terms of what is the impacts that these kinds of investments would have on different vulnerable groups. So it's not just women and girls, though that's how we talk about it, but also different kinds of vulnerable groups that Mr. Joy was talking about, for instance. And also gender equality is not often seen as central to the achievement of mitigation targets, because honestly, you're just thinking about how you're going to reduce the amount of emissions in the ecosystem. So here, the conversation, if at all it happens, it gets stalled at the level of what is the representation and leadership and governance, which in itself is important because this is already very low. But is that all? Are we stretching ourselves enough to think about what more can we think in terms of gender equality in the context of climate mitigation? Okay. In contrast, the impacts of climate change are being felt now by women and girls in vulnerable communities and require significantly more adaptation financing. Now, if you think about it, adaptation financing, while it more than doubled between 2018 and 2022, it's only 76 billion in 2022. I mean, compare this to 1.3 trillion that's been going to climate mitigation, right? This pales in comparison to that. But here, again, we need to think about how we don't need to just think about the future and how we are going to mitigate emissions so that it reduces the impact of climate on communities, but how do we also then think about the here and now, because the effects are being felt here and now. And even when we just dig a little bit deeper into where this adaptation financing is flowing, it's towards water and wastewater projects, but others where you think about representation, Indian agriculture is highly feminized, for instance, so it requires a lot more investments in agriculture, forestry, other land use, etc. That's not where a lot of this financing is going. In fact, it has plateaued or is not growing fast enough. So, and if this is where women tend to seek employment or hold assets or earn livelihoods, then we really need to think about the structure of financing, the financing systems themselves. Thirdly and finally, this is also closely linked to the lack of contextually relevant data that help investors make gender responsive decisions. So you just heard me say very big numbers, 1.3 trillion, 76 billion, etc., right? Now, this is in the global context, and this is best available from from countries that are actually mapping and measuring this. I think both the speakers before me have also talked about the importance of having that baseline data and being able to do M&E around this work. Unless we can break these numbers down into meaningful contextual realities, these come across as somebody else's problem to solve. So they're too big, so investors don't want to engage because it's like, okay, what does this mean for me? I don't know. I'm just going to go on and invest in climate projects because that's what's crucial to me. So it is important not just to track financing flows, including in India, from governments or from private capital sources for both mitigation and adaptation, but also how they intersect or respond to the needs of women and girls. So let me just give you a couple of examples, right? So one is I mentioned India's agriculture is highly feminized. How do we best think about adaptation finance that can be deployed in which sectors, what activities, what geographies? So if adaptation projects are focused on water management, then has data been collected only for infrastructure needs to close the infrastructure gaps on what needs to be done in terms of building check dams and other kind of local types of infrastructure? But are we also collecting data on how it is having the impact on the lived realities of women and girls, right? So how is it helping them reduce or increase the time required for them to collect water, to draw quality water the year round, to build resilience to climate disasters, which affect water supplies? Are we thinking of adaptation finance that is suited to meet the financial and asset needs of women farmers, laborers, employees in agricultural supply chains, of FPOs, or those that own agri-SMEs? Is adaptation finance data, for example, considering the variety of products that's required to combat the impacts of climate change for women, right? So if you're a woman farmer, you don't only need land and asset titles, perhaps, but you also need working capital, you need climate insurance products. How is that data actually coming together to inform the needs of the market and therefore serve the needs of women and girls? How might finance providers incorporate data strategies to overcome all these kinds of systemic barriers that are being faced by women borrowers who, for example, lack collateral or credit history? So for climate finance to respond to the need of women and girls, having local contextualized data remains a blind spot. But for us, it'll be a key in resolving issues both at the local and systems level. And I'm looking forward to hearing some more of these perspectives as we discuss this further. Sorry, Sunidhi, you seem to be on mute.
I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Panthaki. That was such a fascinating perspective and so different than the voices that we hear around climate change and climate justice. Thank you so much. I think something that really resonated with me was how you mentioned that infrastructural projects get more precedence over adaptation financing. I think there is a need to move away from carbon to Homo sapiens, is what I would like to put it as. We will move forward with cross-pollination because I think we're exceeding our time limit by some time. Now, this section of today's webinar is to establish some sort of synergies between each perspective that our panelists are bringing. We'll start with Mr. Kumar and Mr. Joy. Mr. Joy, your work on participatory water governance calls for deep community engagement. And Mr. Kumar, how do you see these approaches aligning with ecosystem-based forest restoration efforts? Could integrating both these lenses strengthen climate resilience in landscapes like the Western Ghats?
Yeah, definitely. Because just I mentioned that nature-based adaptation, one of the basic assumption and principle is to center stage the community. And how much center staging will be done depends upon our baseline survey. What is the institutional gap? How much there is a gap in the awareness? So all those, after the evidence collection, then we will design what type of role and to which intensity the community should be allowed. Also, because it is very important. We can't assume anything that the community is very informed, very aware of all the science-based evidence. So all these are basically evidence-based approach. So that is I am emphasizing in my all eco-restoration project. Whether it is in Aravalli, I am building a model Aravalli project in near Gurgaon area. So that would be the model Aravalli restoration project, keeping the field situation and baseline survey, which is based on the IUCN framework, where socioeconomic, biophysical, ecosystem services, and spatial analysis, all these are done and integrated in a manner to assess the gaps. What are the gaps? What are the driver of degradation? So then we will prescribe, and there we are, you can say, using that blue and green infrastructure concept. So that will integrate the green and blue demand in a symbiotic relationship. It will not be isolated, just create a water body and then do some plantation. It should be a symbiotic relationship between these two, you can say, the basic element of a restoration. And second, I am giving emphasis on the native species. Why the Aravalli or any other area has lost its native species? What is the reason? So we have to go deep into that site condition. So because regions are different, starting from the invasive species plantation by the forest department or by the local people for a short-term gain. So those are the factual reality. We must accept that. And then, but the correction time has come where we have to emphasize on the native species. And for native species, we have to have a, you can say, science-based dialogue with the community. Why a particular species has lost over a period of time, whether it has lost relevance in economy, in their lifestyle, in their cultural practices. What is the reason? So again, based on the evidence, then we will design what type of native plantation, where to be planted, so that the community is benefited by these. And lastly, I will say that this designing in a holistic manner is very important. We have got technical, that is one aspect is the technical input. One is your traditional knowledge. One is the community, informed community, where mobilization and capacity building takes place at the same time. So when these three components mix, technical, community, and this science-based evidence, then we come to a you can say a comprehensive solution. And that is very important, because so far we are doing bits and pieces, you can say fixes. Kahin pe plantation laga do, kahin water structure bana lo. So all these elements are not talking to each other. So we have to create a model where they talk to each other. They work in a synergy. They just like we have to mimic the nature. That is the basic concept. How we can mimic the nature. How hydrology and flora and fauna, they work in natural environment. So just we have to mimic that in our project design, keeping the community in the center stage, so that, and because in Aravalli, just I'm giving example, this urban habitat is being affected very greatly. So we have to enrich the urban habitat where air pollution, water being the center stage, because Aravalli is devoid of water. So water security comes into the center stage, community and native species. And I am giving a lot of emphasis on the waste management system, because that is going to be great value addition. If we do everything and without any proper waste management system, we come to again a zero. So we have to address that that holistic concept of the waste management, how the circular economy can be built, what are the gender issue, what is the other issues. There are a lot of inequality in that. So how we can address plastic pollution, what are the weakness in our present implementation, Although single-use plastic has been banned, but we all know how effective it is on the ground. That is one, again, EPR concept is there, extended producer responsibility concept is there, but how effective it is on the ground. So we have to come to a ground situation, and reality check has to be done so that we give a complete package. So that's why I'm making a model project for 4 villages in near Gurgaon. And that will be, I can say that should be a socially acceptable, you can say technically feasible and environmentally sustainable. Then we can think with some modification, we can implement in all the 4 states of the Aravalli region, because ministry has come up with this Aravalli Green Wall project. That is a huge concept. But working on the ground with evidence-based approach, keeping the community into the picture, into the driving seat, is a really great challenge. So our project design has to be in line with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Mr. Roy, can we hear from you about this?
I missed your question. Is that I need to respond to what Vidya Kumar said?
Yes, and bring in your experience from water governance and ecological restoration that SOPPECOM might have done.
Yeah. So I agree with. I mean, there is no point of debate about what Vidya Kumar said. I mean, it's all. Quite well accepted what he said. See, one of the paradoxes which we have been able to, this is also global paradoxes, is that the most highly what he called biodiversity, the existential biodiversity, also find the most vulnerable communities. You look at any larger river basins, especially in the upper watersheds of those basins, are where ethnicity and the ethnically marginal Adivasis or other type of people live and things. Though they're surrounded by so much of resources, endowments in terms of forests, biodiversity, water and things, we also find that these are also most vulnerable communities. In fact, we tried to do a research in the one of the river basins in Maharashtra, trying to look at precisely this question. So where do you try to bring out this all different forms of vulnerability to these communities, and what could be the pathway to address this? So that's why where our understanding saying that water justice is an important area. Along with intersectionality or interconnectedness with other type of this. So you can't talk about water in isolation from forest or land or other things. So this interconnectedness is something which I think we need to bring in. Now the issue is that how do you create this alternative from the ground? That is where I feel that when I don't use the word participation much, but in terms of democratization of knowledge production itself is very important. In fact, recently we did a project on the Upper Bhima Basin, where we tried to look at co-production of knowledge in terms of trying to look at the what you call water, food and biodiversity nexus, and see how these synergies and trade-offs play out, and what can come out of it in terms of a program which you can take up with this. So I think the whole starting point, we talk about community engagement or participatory or democratic governance and things. I think the knowledge we generate, and today in climate change is very important, because I believe that we really don't know enough. The concept we use in the hydrology, for example, there's something called stationarity, saying that water regimes or rainfall change within a broader envelope of changes. Today it is not. Otherwise, early days, I remember we talking about the average rainfall of a particular area is so much. Today, you can't talk about averages because it is so variation which is taking place across space and time and things. So we need to create new knowledge even to address some of these issues and things. So I think for me, the starting point of this engagement has to be, how do you create a critical knowledge, which is important and things. The second issue is that we find when we talk about some of these issues, this is something I think internally the civil society organizations and NGOs need to look at, what we call climate mitigation, climate adaptation, etc., etc. Some of you, if you're aware of what's happening in Maharashtra, there's a particular program called Jalayukta Shivar. I don't know whether you heard about this word. Jalayukta Shivar means fields full of water and things. This is also a pet project of the present Chief Minister. I'm not going into details of that. Now, what is it does? It basically does straightening, deepening of the streams or rivers, widening the streams, and even straightening. Now, we all know that rivers don't flow straight. It all meanders and other is part of their biophysical characteristics. Now, I remember that we did a study in a couple of districts in Marathwada to see what's happening. We were a little apprehensive of this. And the promise was that through this program, we'll make Maharashtra drought-free in 5 years. Thousands of crores were spent on it. A lot of things happened, but our study shows that probably it has not benefited much, but it has destroyed our own natural ecosystems in a great manner. Now, my point of question is that why is that NGOs and civil society organizations who have done fantastic work around long-term engagement in terms of watershed development are all getting into this bandwagon? Why are not critical about some of these interventions? Though we all know that is going to be destroying our ecosystems and other things beyond repairs and things. So I think for me, internally, the question is that when you talk about participatory governance and things, one is this kind of a knowledge building from below, mobilizing communities, and also saying that the benefits you make. And I agree with Seema when she said that most of our interventions in terms of climate mitigation or adaptation is basically infrastructural, and also what I call in the water sector, supply augmentation. You create check dams basically to supply. But what happens with water? Who gets access to it? How that water gets used? Whatever cropping pattern gets established, which we broadly call in the water sector the demand management side, never gets looked up. So I think probably along with what Vidya Kumar said, I would like to add this couple of points to this discussion, saying that when you talk about participatory governance or democratic resource governance or ecosystem resource governance, we need to start this process from a building on new knowledge through a participatory processes, then access to getting data today. Data itself becomes a political. Which data you use, which data gets thrown out of the window, which may not be palpable to people. Publicly funded institutions create a whole lot of data, but they are never available. Even for NGOs, to get remotely sensed images and things, so expensive. Even you have to use some of this imagery to track changes. As a change in detection studies, or even for your micro planning, you don't get access to data. So democratizing data itself is a big thing which I think we need to talk about. Of course, I'm not saying there are certain data we can start to work with. That's not that everything will be created, but I think this is an area which we all need to work together and things, and then building communities around that, and also the whole distributive justice thing. So water redistribution, restructuring, and also building this whole understanding of how do you actually reduce the water footprint. Otherwise, what happens that water saved in one place, there are a lot of water saving technologies today, and government promotes all these things, whether it is drip irrigation or other type of thing. But the saved water never becomes part of a common pool and gets shared to people who have no access to water, or doesn't flow back into your river systems or aquifers in terms of this. So I think we need to, where does this finance goes? It's the public money which is going into that. I'm sure Seema would have more responses to that and things. So unless we shift to something called a people-centric demand-side management of our resources, especially water, I don't think any amount of money, any type of infrastructure, any type of interventions can resolve some of these issues and things. Yeah, I stop there.
That's very true, Nikhila. Thank you so much for highlighting that. We move forward with the next pair. Dr. Panthaki, you work to mobilize capital for gender just climate solutions, while Dr. Joy focuses on grassroots participatory governance. How do you see philanthropy supporting decentralized justice-oriented water governance, and what risks or opportunities do you foresee in bridging these worlds?
Yeah, so I think this has already been brought up before. So there are actually several opportunities here in terms of how do we make climate justice movements gender equitable, right? So I think the first thing to recognize here is that women's leadership in climate is not something new or remote. It's already happening. It's not about bringing them into climate action because they're already actually leading it. They're driving sustainable agriculture, resource management, building household resilience. They are farmers, they are SHG holders, cooperative leaders, hydrologists, local panchayat leaders, making investment decisions to build community resilience, their bank managers and paralegals supporting processes and asset ownership. So I think this is already kind of happening around that. And I think philanthropy's role should really be around finding ways of at least shifting the underlying systems that enable this kind of gender equality to move forward, right? So I would suggest that perhaps there are 2 or 3 things that need to happen in terms of, and then there is opportunity to do this. The first is to redistribute power and agency, and philanthropy has a key role to play in this. One of the things that we've seen work very well is when there are philanthropic projects which show pilots on the ground, and then they're adapted within government systems to scale where they show results. I think that's a great way of catalyzing philanthropic investments that are being made, not just for that immediate purpose, but actually taking this to scale and taking this far. So I think the first thing that we need to think about is how do we redistribute power and agency, right? So policy making here is a very powerful tool, perhaps more so actually than financing in redistributive justice. So how would development finance systems work in this regard, including through philanthropy? I think this is primarily through using policy levers, for instance, to support ownership and local decision making, whether it's around implementing policies to ensure that women are able to own land assets. You will know that we do have progressive policies on ownership, asset ownership in this country, but actually asset ownership by women remains woefully low. So I think it's about making sure that those policies that are already in place are implemented well, because that's a key means for redistributing power within given social, economic, and legal systems. I think a second way of redistributing power and agency is also to ensure that existing systems that enable to do that. For example, we have a leadership pipeline that has been created through reservation and local bodies, panchayats, etc., for women, that this mechanism is continue to be provided for, because it does provide those community-based leaders to be able to make decisions and deploying capital towards climate change. So we need to think about philanthropy in wider terms of how resources can actually support local level leadership, panchayat level leadership, and bringing women into that pipeline and being able to deploy their leadership in an effective way, so that they are able to then make those changes or deploy decisions that affect climate change. I think a second thing around the role of philanthropy and the opportunities for it is around investing in long-term capacity and infrastructure. I think Mr. Vidya Kumar already, made the point about providing flexible funding, and I think this is really important. And philanthropy needs to recognize, because at the moment, philanthropy thinks it's very project-oriented approach, right? I'm going to put X amount of money and I'm going to have X amount of outcomes come at the end of 1 year or 3 years. But systems change doesn't happen in 1 year or 3 years. Norms don't shift in 1 or 3 years. So we do need to think about flexible funding. How do we address sort of the different needs of the outcomes that we're looking for through this kind of flexible funding? How, is it about scale at a particular point? Is scale the issue? Is actually, are we even tackling the right kind of problem the issue? Is data an issue? So providing technical, flexible financing is a key way of doing that. And therefore you need to, that's a way of also investing in long-term capacity and infrastructure. I think a second big one for us is around investing in women's leadership in climate negotiations. So you may have seen in the last COP, every year pictures come out of the COP negotiations, and it's a whole bunch of men, maybe like one woman standing there. And that's actually a structural problem that can be fixed. It's because the way in which the COP negotiations are set up, women don't go there because the pipeline within decision making in governments, which is where COP draws its leadership pipeline for, there are not enough women in the ministries of environment or climate that can then represent their country. So at a local level, it's very important that we respond to that by investing in climate leadership of women and then bringing them to these big decision-making tables where they are able to voice, and again, I always feel like women's issues are often talked about by women, and we need both men and women to champion them, right? It shouldn't just be a woman leader's responsibility to stand up for other women. But it is an important representational issue that we've been struggling with. And I think that's another big opportunity that we need to think about in terms of long-term capacity and infrastructure investments as we think about going forward. Let me pause there in the interest of time and pass over to Mr. Vidya Kumar.
Mr. Vidya Kumar, I am curious about what your perspective is about the lack, per se, I wouldn't say lack, I believe, but this shortage of women and the female leadership at platforms like the COP. And does that somewhat reflect in the Ministry of Forests and Environment, Forests and Climate Change as well? Based on your experience in the Forest Service?
I think you are muted, sir. You have to unmute.
Mr. Kumar, I believe you might have.
No, he's still muted, I think.
Yes, I'm not able to give him the permission either.
Oh, no, but acha.
Mr. Kumar, may I just ask you to rejoin the meeting through the link that might have come on your email?
So, meanwhile, can I just respond to Seema till he joins? I think you raised very important point, which I think in the civil society organization we have been talking about over the last 10 years or so, is the need for flexible financing and funding. See, as you all know that most of the funds which come today into these sectors are from the CSR funding. And CSR, basically, as you said, they put X amount of money, they want so much of results in a year's time, targets oriented, their names should be there and things. I remember in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of critical political economic questions which are asked in the development sector, and there have been some resources available for good groups to do some critical work and things. Today, I think one of the important things we find lacking is that nobody wants to put the resources into long-term, as you said, flexible, asking critical questions, because we have no blueprints today. And I think the money should go into areas where some innovations are taking place, some innovative ideas being tried to be piloted. And that is where, and even knowledge production is important. Knowledge is a multiplier. You can come up with different ideas. So I think, so if you can push the finance to at least partially to some of these areas where critical questions are being asked in terms of whether it is gender, whether it is Dalits, for example, issues. Why are the Dalits always omitted out of any discussion on climate change or environment and today? That is why we have posed the discourse today. In fact, so I think some of those minor sections need to be brought into the mainstream discourse. And our effort should be in terms of piloting innovations. And we are not there to replace the state. The scaling up or upscaling or whatever you do is actually a state's responsibility. The NGO should not get into, keeping huge implementation of large scale projects and things. Their main emphasis, according to me, after 30 years of experience, is that we need to ask critical questions and create innovations into this. There's a different way of doing things. And then it is up to pressurize the government to take it up, either in terms of policy or in terms of other type of a thing is important. So I support you that, in terms of the importance of having this flexible finance. Otherwise, people like us also, are chasing targets. And tell you frankly, why should I waste my time doing that? I can do much more. But then you have an institution, you need to keep it going. So you take up projects which are very time bound. All that is there. So it is a existential dilemma which many of us have. But I think if you have a window of flexible financing and things, that is something which we need to actually promote and try to see. Yeah, thanks.
I think that's a very relevant perspective, Mr. John. Mr. Kumar, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, he is now unmuted.
Yeah, please, can you repeat the question? Because
Yes, of course. Dr. Panthaki reflected that there is this shortage of female leadership in platforms like the COP, and that itself is an indication of what is happening locally. I wonder if you also concur with her perspective over here, especially being have from a background of forest service, and is that also a systemic problem in the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change? I hope that's not too question.
No, it is not true. Because in ministry at various levels, if you can say the frontline staff in the wildlife, there is a separate ladies battalion in Assam who taking care of wildlife. So a lot of, you can say there is a lot of improvement in the women's representation in the frontline staff, in the officer category, in the decision making. Our secretary was also female for some time. So we can't say that it is by any design. So, but at the same time, there has to be a capacity building. And once the benefits or interest of joining the forest service at various levels are disseminated to the targeted group, then a lot of representation will come. So that is in the government sector. But as long as the villagers are concerned, who are the community, there is a definitely low representation in the community. We have done that baseline survey in Aravali project in the Gurgaon area. So the women were not in a decision-making process. They are hardly, you can say, free to talk, to share the factual positions. So that is the reality. But that is the reality. But again, we should not stop there. We should have it designed how to improve that representation, how to improve the informed decision making, how to improve the nature education, because all were knowing the fact, but they are not doing anything. So that from knowing to doing, that is the role of NGO and the other government sector also. But again, it can only happen when we capture the ground reality in a true sense. Otherwise, we will be again biased, whether it is A body or B body, whether it is NGO, CSO or government. So they will again see their own lens. But my only take is that we should have a reality check. We should be completely evidence-based and as per the objective assessment of the situation.
Sudhir, I have a comment to make on this discussion on these women's leadership. I mean, it's a very important issue which is posed. I give you two examples. One is that SOPPECOM did a study of two states, of the water bureaucracy in terms of the water resource department. Who are they? So it's an empirically evidence-based type of a thing. It's about 90% of men, and the women who are there basically into admin and clerical type of thing. They are not the technical people who manages projects like chief engineers or other type of thing. Now the issues are two levels. One is the whole question of patriarchy in the society, and we need to address that squarely. And second is that because of the patriarchy type of thing, the type of education which we get into, boys are sent to certain things and girls are sent into things. So this all get reflected and reproduced in the whole thing. So so I would slightly differ from Vidya Kumar saying that it's not by design. There is a design, and we should accept it where things move, and we need to consciously do that. Second is that in 2009 I mentioned about this National Water Policy Making Committee which was appointed. One progressive thing was that the first time not a bureaucrat which headed the committee, it was Mihir Shah, we committed from a different perspective. But who are the committee members? There were 10, 11, all men. And so then some of us raised this issue, why no women in the committee? So finally they asked the suggestions, one woman was brought in. Among 11 or 12 men, there is one woman who was the committee. So this is, I think, played out in water sector I've seen and things. You see, there are a lot of water warriors or water men. I don't see any water women or in Australia. It's not that there are no women who are doing interesting work. There are women. So I think there is an issue which is much more deep rooted in this we need to. And similarly, you look at it's not only state bureaucracies. You look at NGOs who are in the water sector. Who are they? They are urban. They are coming from a particular caste background, and they are males. So there's an intersectionality of that also. Unless we challenge some of these things and democratize NGOs and civil society organizations in terms of bringing in diversity, you don't even have this conversation in the organizations, some of these. I've seen this. certain type of conversations are banned in certain organizations because of things. So I think democratizing our own setups in terms of bringing in more diversity, whether it is gender, caste, ethnicity, is an important thing to whatever we are talking about, and we need to be sensitive to this. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Joy. It makes me very proud to mention that Raah Foundation is a woman-led organization,
Wow.
and a major chunk of our staff are all women, and
Good.
especially at the
Yeah.
leadership level as well. Ankita is here, and I think Madhavi was also here. They are some of the most inspirational women that I have ever met. Yes, Mr. Vidya Kumar.
Yeah, just present, just for information, the present water secretary happens to be women, Mrs. Mukherjee.
I know her because she has been coming for our water policy meetings and things. That time she was not the secretary. See, my point is not, it's not that there are no, women in the top.
No,
That also we had a
your
prime
point
minister who
is,
was a woman, but that does not mean that the society, the whole setup is, informed of the gender issues. Yeah.
That asymmetry is everywhere. So
Yeah.
we can't be oblivion of that fact.
Yes.
But what to do from there? We have to design something to improve their representation.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Action lies there.
Yeah, I love the
think
fact, Sunidhi, that both the men are very supportive of the need for gender equity, and they're fighting about it. And I just have to keep quiet, right?
We used to have
not
meetings in
fighting.
Maharashtra of feminist men. We had 2-3
Yeah,
meetings.
no, you're fighting for it, not fighting about it. You're fighting
So what
for
I'm
it. So I'm really
saying-
glad to see that, because, as I said, right, women's leadership should not be a women's issue. It's a men and women's issue,
Men,
because gender
both.
equality is just that. It's the equality
Yeah.
between men and women. So we need to
Yes.
bring them both to
Both
parity.
together. Yeah.
And it's important that we talk about this. Yeah.
I think our webinar just actually took a very beautiful turn, and like Dr. Panthaki reflected, this has been such a wonderful evening. I will open the floor to any audience questions that we might have. Please drop in your questions in the Q&A box that you will find on the periphery of your window. We'll try to take as many as time allows. Simi, you will have to. I may not be able to unmute you. I think it would be better if you drop your question in the chat box. Vikas, could you please coordinate with Simi, perhaps?
Yeah, wait. Oh, yeah, Sunidhi. Simi, you can ask your question now.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Simi. I am working with something called Biodiversity National Resource Organization. I was listening to Dr. Seema and Joy sir and Vidya sir. So anyway, I am pretty sure that everybody of us will know about the program called the Day in RLM. It is National Rural Livelihood Mission, which is also working on the gender lens. And we were discussing about local planning and then decentralized planning at the local level, where the panchayat will also be, local governments are also involved in the process. So, one point is about bringing a convergence with this when we are actually trying to, get into the gender lens and also with the local planning for the climate actions. So then, Day in Arlam and MGNRGS. MGNRGS is a wonderful central government program which actually uh, uh, helps for asset creation at the local level, which promotes for the participation of women. So this is one point I actually wanted to contribute to the discussion. And also, I really wanted to know what the Aravalli pilot project, which Vidya sir was talking about, if that can be like, what is the community aspect in that? What exactly the involvement of the community in it, if that can be explained.
Regarding this Aravalli project, we have just finished our baseline survey. So we have captured what is the socioeconomic status, what is the women's role at present, what are the gaps in the institutions, because there are so many institutions that exist on the paper, but in actual representation that is lacking. Just I will give you an example that biodiversity register has to be maintained as per the Biodiversity Act. But I am struggling to find out a verified biodiversity register. So similarly, there are so many, just we are compiling. And once we finish with this baseline survey, then I would be in a position to comment specifically which is the gap, especially on the gender issue or the community gap. But there is definitely a gap in the awareness. Why this biodiversity loss has taken place in Aravalli? Everybody is knowing that it is mainly due to mining. Land use practices is not sustainable. Through our data, we come to a you can say conclusion that the agriculture area has shrunk. Agriculture area has shrunk, and the settlement area has gone up. So there are so many indicators. Based on those evidences, now we are coming to our planning strategy, how to plan, where to have a more green space, water space, all those things we are planning. But in terms of community, they are more now, you can say semi-migrant type of thing, because that area happens to be near to Gurgaon. So they go in the morning, come in the evening, and the land prices is so high. So that is also one of the factor how to put area under the sustainable, you can say, management practices, because it has to be economic viable for them. Whether we promote agroforestry or horticulture or agriculture. So, but the rental value is so high there. So all those factors we are considering and examining, and then we will come to a certain, you can say, a proposal which is acceptable to the community itself. But definitely there is a huge gap in the perception, knowledge, and you can say how sustainable environment can be built up in particular that area, because that is the urban habitat. So everybody is facing water, but how to secure water, how to integrate the invasive species has spread so much. It is occupying more than 30-40% of the forest area, but only piecemeal and ad hoc approach is being taken. How to have a state policy to address invasive species management. So those are the bigger issues. So from the ground position, we are coming to our policy planning and then the policy level formulation. So based on the evidence, we will have some recommendation both for the project planning and the policy interventions.
Okay, thank you, sir. Are there any information or details available regarding this pilot project in your website or somewhere? Any documentation or anything?
No. Our baseline survey. That is data we will share, because this project is with the State Forest Department. So they are also our partner. So whatever data we are collecting is through State Forest Department.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. What happened to Suniti now? Yeah,
She's busy
yeah, I
somewhere.
know she's disappeared or she's still there. So
Any other question from anybody? Because we are here.
I know.
I think there's one in the chat. What aspects of climate financing a community should be aware for effective implementation of how can we inform the community or involve community to bring their voice to global discussions?
So probably you're the best person to answer that. I mean,
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
You can try.
Yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is an important question, Rishikesh, and I think it speaks to the point that there is climate financing happening at different levels, and people do understand climate financing in different ways, right? So there are different types of climate financing. Now, I think where private financing is involved, this is usually investments, and bringing community voices in there is usually through making sure that you are able to bring the data to bear on the kinds of outcomes that you want to see with a private investor, because for them this is very much an issue of a return on investment. So I think it's quite important that you're able to show an investment. I think if you're thinking about different kinds of investments from the philanthropic sector, for example, this is where the voice of the communities, this is a big role that the philanthropic sector plays in terms of surfacing the voices of communities in climate financing and decision making. Where should the money go? How it should be used, what part of climate financing is important, whether it's water, it's energy, whether it's it's towards livelihoods, it's towards creating security. So that's one piece. I think a second piece is where the power of government systems cannot be underestimated here in terms of bringing climate financing. So we think about climate financing in a very kind of cold way, but actually, if you think about the way in which government deploys climate financing, right, through whether it's making these promises around the NDCs in global platforms, but then also using budgetary allocations. I think that's a key kind of way in which you surface your voice. And in terms of effective implementation of climate financing, there's participatory budget mechanisms that are available. There is panchayat level decision making. But there is also ways in which you can raise these kinds of issues through your local representative. You are voting for a range of issues, and climate is one of them. So making sure that is through sort of the participatory mechanisms that panchayat level discussions or participatory budgetary processes help with is important. I think gender budgeting has become an important part in the way that the government of India moves its financing. So that's an important lever also to shift the way in which budgets move towards climate financing. So there are many ways of thinking of this, but I think there are many considerations that you need to think about depending on who's funding this work. Is it the private sector? Is it the corporates? Is it, I mean private sector, I mean impact investors, or private equity funds? Is it governments? It's multilateral financing. So there are many, many ways of getting at community voices heard, and you need to be able to find who the funder is to be able to get that into the climate financing system. I don't know if that helps your question.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good response. Yeah. Oh. Is Suniti still around or no? She's, she's there.
Yes, she's here.
Yeah. Hi.
I'm so sorry for that. It's been raining a bit consistently in Bangalore.
We thought you deserted us.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And you know what happened? I'm sure Sneha or Vikas must have managed in my absence.
Yeah, there was one question which I think very ably handled by Seema. So I think there were only two issues which came up. I think they have been responded to. Yeah.
Wonderful. We're nearing the end of our session today. Before we close, I'd like to invite each panelist to share a brief closing reflection. If you had to advise a young climate leader building a new movement today, one that is deeply intersectional and justice centered, what's one principle or lesson from your work that you'd ask them to carry forward?
So for the young, you can say professional or leader, my suggestion would be in two parts. One, how to approach and what should be the content of your approach. So first, regarding approach, you have to take a holistic perspective of any situation. It should be evidence-based as per some standard framework for doing the baseline assessment. It should not be a part assessment. It should be complete assessment of the four verticals, 4 dimensions. Second would be the center stage, the most affected or marginalized people, whatever you find in your survey, not through assumption, because there the maturity of the community differs from region and from villages. So it should be against evidence-based. And third, the most important, that your intervention should be based on the traditional knowledge of the local people, whatever you gather, and backed by the science. So when you combine these three in terms of approach, so then you will be in a better position to handle any situation. Second part is the content. So for me, the most important is the plastic pollution. That is because now India has become the most polluter country in the world. And we are not paying attention in spite of our legal framework. So our legal framework is there, but the enforcement is very, very weak. We are missing so many things. We are not taking any holistic, because I have started a pilot project in Ranthambore for the plastic control. We are doing in one Panna, and now we are going to Taroba also. Because Taroba is doing very good work because they are taking a holistic view. So they are spreading in the buffer area. So again, my advice to young leader would be to take a holistic view of the why plastic pollution is happening. Don't put or collect this garbage and throw some other place. It has to be come to a recycling end. Only then the problem will be addressed. Otherwise, just burning and dumping and putting from X to Y space is not going to solve the problem. It has to be circular in economy. That is the number one, plastic pollution. And this restoration has not happened so good because we have got only very small success stories, bits and pieces. So if we're going to tackle, for example, your Nasik area, that eco-sensitive areas in the Western Ghats or Aravalli Hills. So there has to be impact on that region. Only then it can be taken as a professional approach to the problem. And my, again, passion is for the native species. And I will advise lastly to the young leader that through your knowledge and approach, you can touch lives of the lot of marginalized people. So that should be your mission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar. Mr. Joy?
My quick reaction would be that the oldies should not advise the young leaders because they are much more creative. And this I genuinely say. I mean, whole lot of youngsters I work with, they are much more creative. They come up with off-the-cuff responses, out-of-box solutions. So probably I would say that there are a lot of social experience they can, use it and things. No, maybe people like us should not get into too much of advisory roles, so that there is much better, solution can emerge. That is the. But then having asked this question, I just have 3 small remarks. One is that we should realize it's not only youngsters, all of us should realize, and youngsters more because they're getting into an area fresh, that there are no quick fixed solutions. There are no magic bullet points. We need to struggle, we need to explore, we need to experiment. And in our interaction with the communities, we should be open to learn from them. We are not going there and say, oh, this is a solution which will work. In my own engagement, I have transformed myself. I've changed my own viewpoints in this long-term engagement with the communities. So for me, an engagement with the community is a two-way traffic, because people like me or people who are coming from outside with certain disciplinary knowledge, different type of experiences, also have something to contribute to the communities in terms of opening up the different possibilities. And similarly, the people have something to teach you. So this two-way traffic should be kept alive with an openness that people can also teach you from their own experience and knowledge and other things. And from this secondary key, how do you produce knowledge in a co-production mode where all of you produce knowledge together? That should be the basis, which Vidya Kumar also mentioned about scientific and other type of a thing, is a knowledge, co-produced knowledge with the communities, which should be the basis to articulate your alternatives, which is ecologically, socially just and things. And there people will contribute to this. Second issue, which I would like to say, that all of us need to walk on both the legs. Whatever sector we are involved, whether we are in the water sector, we are working with the women, or we are working with Dalits, or we are working on energy issues, there we need to do well. But the other leg should be rooted in the social movements. If we need to actually foreground the social justice and climate justice issues, we need to work with the Dalits, we need to work with the women's movements, we need to work with the trade unions, we need to work with the farmers' movements and things. I think this rootedness is important. Otherwise, we don't ask some of the questions people out there ask and things. So I would always say that we need to walk on both these legs. Third, in water sector, we say we need to exercise precautionary principle, in the sense that where knowledge is incomplete or there are conflicting knowledge systems, and climate change brings that context into us. We are not sure. There's a lot of uncertainty around us. So whatever you do, use the precautionary principle, because even if you fail on the safer space. So this is all the three small things I want to say. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. It's very gracious of you to say that young generations should not be meddled with. But I think persons like you are this inspiration, because we are drawing from years and years of credible experience. So I would count that for sure. Dr. Panthaki.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't have much more to add to than what Mr. Joy and Mr. Kumar have already said, but just a couple of reflections from my own journey as well. And, having met a lot of young people who are passionate about climate change. So I think the first thing to note is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. So pace yourselves, because, I've seen a lot of burnout and fatigue and, people getting they don't believe in the cause anymore because they get so exasperated by, the noise in the ecosystem. So I think it's a marathon, not a sprint, and people need to think about that. I think a second big piece of advice would be around narrative building, right? So a lot of the things that we've talked about today are very personal to people. And it's important that we recognize their voice. We don't speak for them, but we allow them those spaces. As a part of this narrative building piece, but also it's a journey towards winning hearts and minds. There will be lots of issues. You will come up against big business, you'll come up against big power, you'll come up against roadblocks because the technology is not right, or the moment is not right. So I think it's just also about thinking about how you win hearts and minds as you go along the way. When you're thinking about the new opportunities that have opened up for example, for livelihoods for women in sectors like green energy, this requires them, for instance, to go out and, to go out to sites, to maybe fixing solar panels, to be selling things in villages, which requires them, to be mobile at all hours of the day. And this requires community support, family support. So how are you going to build, that? How are you going to win hearts and minds along the journey of creating those kind of normative changes that are required to take everybody along the journey? And finally, I think just stay the course, because this is too important to fail. You need to think really creatively. You need to think big. There are many entry points. We are now not just talking about climate and gender. You're also talking about, the health impacts on women and girls of climate, right? So you need to think about these new entry points that are coming up. So I would encourage leaders also to think more broadly and widely about the entry points they're thinking about when they're thinking about solving climate issues going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Panthaki, because Raah Foundation currently is in a discourse where we spread our wings towards climate change and public health. Just putting it out there, and hope it manifests into something beautiful in the coming quarter/year. I think we have one more question, which I will allow because since this entire webinar was in celebration of World Environment Day, and this year's theme is beating plastic pollution. Anil KD asks how to control plastic pollution in an industrial government organization. He says that he belongs to this particular establishment. Mr. Vidya Kumar?
Yeah, because there are laid down procedure by the CPCB. You have to be plastic neutral. That is the first step. Whatever you consume and whatever you recycle has to be neutral. And there are detailed guidelines under the plastic waste management rules, that is 2016, that has been amended in 22 and 23 also. And the EPR concept has come. So every industry has a, you can say, obligation to bring back those their products from the field for the recycling. And that is staggered. In the first year, 40%, then 50%, then 60%. So, and that is not limited that what you only produce. For example, if Bisleri produces a lot of water bottle and Coca-Cola also produces. So Bisleri can also collect those bottles. So it is not restricted to their brand, but under extended producer responsibility, either producer or branding agency, if that is branded in some name. So that is also under the law, under the obligation to collect those material from the field and put into the recycling. So there is a detailed guideline. I will advise you to go through that plastic waste management rule. That is also for the, you can say, there is an open portal for the CPCB. You have to register there. You have to give account how much you have imported, how much you have produced, how much you have recollected. Then only the license will be continued further. I think it is enough, or I can take a lot long session also on that.
I think it would be better if Anil KD was connected with you. Anil KD will.
Yeah.
I'll just give
please
you,
share my number and email ID. So if I can share, because I am doing a lot of action on the ground. So I know the real problem, where the problem lies.
I think we must be wrapping up because we are exceeding our time limit. Thank you for your closing thoughts. It's definitely clear that climate justice isn't just a policy objective. It's a more moral and ecological imperative. I think this evening has been a powerful discourse about effecting change in this sector. On behalf of Raah Foundation's Center for Policy Research and Action, I'm sure all of us will take back inspiration for shifting climate change from rhetoric to reality in our respective workplaces. Mr. Kumar, Mr. Joy, and Dr. Panthaki, I wholeheartedly thank you for taking the time out to join us this evening. A big shout out to my team at work for their support. Sarika Kulkarni, Sarayu Kamath, Veena Joshi, Monica Rao, Neha Dikshit, and Vikas Patil. And thank you to all the participants who joined and made this event possible and successful. Thank you so much. please do
Just
look
last
out
word.
for.
Just last word. Sunil, just last word. This year happens to be the theme of this World Environment Day is ending plastic pollution. So this year we should more focus on the plastic pollution. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for that. We will be coming up with another edition of our webinar series soon, and I hope all of us, all of you, can please join in and sort of contribute to the discourse about climate change and its effects, and ensuring that we're mitigating it, especially in the northern Western Ghats. That said, thank you so much. I'll be ending the meeting.
Thank you. Namaskar
Thanks.
to all.
Yeah. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.